course, brother, right now, of course we cannot.
The UFC is no stranger to a good dose of controversy, and whether it's infighting between the fighters or Uncle Dana and company getting their hands dirty on the business side of things, the sport of MMA is a magnet for drama. We're going through all of the standout controversies in UFC history. The UFC 223 Media Day will go down in history as one of the most chaotic moments the UFC has ever known. And the man at the center of it all, Conor McGregor, wasn't even scheduled to fight that weekend. After event headliner Khabib Nurmagomedov was filmed cornering Conor's friend and training Artem Lobov with a bunch of his cronies, embarrassing him for the world to see. An enraged McGregor immediately gathered up a posse and flew over to Brooklyn to confront him. Unfortunately, he missed his opportunity to get Khabib while he was out in the open. In other words, he arrived late, so he did what any sensible person would do and attacked the entire Red Corner bus, attempting to shatter the windows with a dolly, injuring some of the fighters on board in the process. He was later arrested, and despite Dana White's anger, the seed has been planted for something truly huge, which we'll immediately transition to.
Shut your mouth, Ali Abdelaziz, mad terrorist, terrorist snitch. I know a lot about you as well, you mad rat.
However, it was the wrestling and constant pressure of Khabib that wore McGregor down, culminating in a fourth-round stoppage. But just as the referee peeled the eagle off of his fallen adversary, Khabib heard Team McGregor's Dylan Dennis roaring insults at him. And in that moment, he snapped, vaulting over the side of the cage, turning things into a scene of total chaos. By the time the dust had settled, Nurmagomedov had been escorted out of the arena. But at that moment, despite leaving a bad taste in everyone's mouth, he had proven one thing beyond any doubt. His bite was clearly much greater than his bark. Nick Diaz doesn't play by the rules, and something as silly as a drug test for marijuana is not going to be seen as important. Diaz doesn't take steroids, and every single other fighter in the sport knows it's true. The anti-doping testers probably all know it as well. But just because you're not a suspect, it doesn't mean you can get off scot-free from testing. And 3 positive tests for marijuana were enough to earn Diaz a ridiculous 5-year suspension from competition.
Wait a minute, this guy was suspended for 5 years and got a $150,000 fine for marijuana?
The Nevada State Athletic Commission very clearly wanted to make an example out of him. But the entire MMA world got behind Nick in support, and eventually, the NSAC reduced the suspension to 18 months. But it kinda killed Nick's faith in the fight game, and apart from one comeback fight, he seemed pretty disillusioned with the sport from there onwards, which was a real shame.
You will hear from me soon on the Nick Diaz situation.
The UFC, and more specifically Dana White, have never been above intimidating the media from time to time. So when Ariel Helwani reported the news that Brock Lesnar would be returning for UFC 200, just before they were planning to reveal it on the UFC 199 broadcast, they took immediate action.
Said, get out of here. You're done. You're not welcome here. He said, go to Bellator, go cover Bellator, which is the number 2 promotion in the United States.
Not only was Helwani escorted out of the arena, he was also handed a lifetime ban from UFC events for simply doing his job. The MMA community quickly rallied behind him, and the ban was lifted.
Brock Lesnar is back, returning at UFC 200.
Is that real?
That's real. That's as real as it gets.
I'm just finding this out.
Back in the good old days, UFC fighters would basically wear whatever they wanted on their shorts. This ranged from businesses that wanted to act as sponsors for the fighters to some pretty questionable short choices. But basically, the fighters earned way more money and could design their own fight kit exactly how they wanted. Unfortunately, when the UFC aren't getting a slice of the pie, they don't like it. And so, they decided to sign a lucrative deal with Reebok, earning themselves a huge yearly payout.
Ladies and gentlemen, the UFC kit.
While forcing the fighters to forego all independence when it comes to their fight kits. Instead of getting their own sponsors, they wore the same brand as their opponent and earned a comparatively tiny payout per fight. Yet another way the promotion has managed to make their fighters' lives harder. These days, if you take a short notice fight, Dana White will sing your praises, calling you a warrior, and it might even earn you a favor down the line. If you reject a short notice replacement, you're instantly an enemy of the company. The reason? Well, Dana probably still has some sour grapes over that time. Dan Henderson was forced to pull out of his UFC 151 clash with Jon Jones just 8 days out from fight night. Obviously, this was a total nightmare for the promoters, but when they lined up Chael Sonnen to replace Hendo, they were certain that they had figured it all out.
Chael, what do you think the real reason was for Jon Jones not to fight you?
Jon Jones has his own way of going about things, okay? This guy is an entitled brat.
But on the advice of his coaches, Jones refused to take the short notice fight. This, as you might expect, sent Dana into a huge rage, where he publicly ridiculed Jon and his team for their decision.
His coach, Greg Jackson, told him not to take the fight, saying it would be the biggest mistake that he's ever made in his entire career, which is absolutely insane. We bought the UFC in 2001. I've done almost 1,800 fights. No fighter has ever turned down a fight, and this is the first ever UFC that's ever had to be canceled.
From a professional athlete's perspective, it makes sense. But this was bad for business. UFC 151, in the end, totally imploded, and the UFC were forced to postpone the entire show. Dana White is such a powerful presence within the UFC that he basically has free reign to act as judge, jury, and executioner to any of his fighters, staff, the media, and, as it turns out, himself. When the UFC boss was captured on camera in a physical altercation on New Year's Eve 2023 with his wife, where they both slapped each other, it was a terrible look. But if you thought that this would result in a resignation, or even any consequences for Dana, think again. Nope, he simply stood up in front of the media, told them that any move to oust him from control would only hurt the UFC and its fighters, then declared that his true punishment would be that he would have to live with the knowledge of what he did for the rest of his life. Then he immediately went back to promoting Power Slap like nothing ever happened. Seriously, you gotta admire how he could do it all with a straight face. Never underestimate the lengths the UFC will go to in order to appease one of their stars and make a quick buck. And for Jon Jones, who had messed up time and time again, a positive test for Turinabol 6 days out from his UFC 232 clash with Alexander Gustafsson threatened to ruin the event. But even though many fans had already bought their tickets ahead of this Christmas period card, Uncle Dana decided to uproot the entire show and move it from Las Vegas to Inglewood, California. Supposedly, the California State Athletic Commission were able to budge on letting Jones fight in a way that Nevada simply wouldn't. The event went ahead, Jones beat Gus by third-round TKO, and the UFC took home a whole bunch of money. But to say that the fans and media were shocked and appalled would be an understatement.